Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and we've got a banger for you this morning. Now, recently, Peacock, in association with The Atlantic, put out their quote-unquote docu-series, Shadowland. And as a lot of you guys know, I was interviewed twice behind the scenes for this. Other people that were interviewed behind the scenes for this and even had a camera crew out were people like Riss Flex, and I believe Chrissy Meyer was with her on one of those occasions. And very early on, from where my background interviews were, I could tell that they were going or trying to go in a certain direction. And the person that I was interviewing with, Amel, I did so in a format in which we were having a video conference, and every time that she asked me for a source or what I was talking about or to name who this person was, I would. And I would do so on the screen. And by the way, I taped those interviews. I don't do any interviews with the mainstream ever. It's New York Times, it's Esquire, without them first knowing we're taping the interview. And then if they don't want me to put out the full taped interview, they have to come on my show after they do the hit piece on me and face the music. I think it's a nice little arrangement because it works out for both of us. I know they want to do a hit piece. I know that they don't want the raw video out there, so they'll come and face the music and try to kind of marginalize it. They realize that I don't have the audience of the New York Times or Esquire or other authoritative sources. But when I saw what they did to people, especially Zach Vorhies and Miriam Hunain, who, they kind of come as a combo pack in this, I was extremely distraught because they not only try to lump in and generalize everybody into not only a crazy conspiracy theorist, but a QAnon censor and somebody that's going to somehow cause a vast insurrection or civil war, but they also marginalized what Zach did. And that really upset me because what Zach did via exposing Google censorship is he put the nail in the coffin that these authoritative sources aren't really authoritative at all, and they are using algorithms to basically uplift information from mainstream sources and then downgrade anything alternative that may go against the narrative. So for the next 30 minutes to an hour, we're going to be talking to Zach about this in particular. But Zach, let's start at the beginning of your journey, my friend. Take us all the way back to when you're working as an engineer in Google and you start seeing this paperwork and this, I would say, atmosphere within a company that is pro-censorship and really digitally taking away dissent.
Yeah, well, Google was a really great company all the way until Donald Trump got elected. And then it just went completely the opposite direction. They went from a libertarian organization where we were trying to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible, how to amplify the individual, to we've got to protect our users from fake news. And so they started generating these design documents as sort of internal propaganda to get the company on board with a radical reinterpretation of the company's. Well, it's not even a radical reinterpretation. It was just pretty much like, we're going to go a completely different direction than we have before. And I caught them. I was on the inside. I saw the documents. They had access to full-time employees. I didn't actually work on the censorship team. I was working on the YouTube product. And I just started going through these design documents and being like, wow, if the American public saw this, they would be pretty outraged. And it was pretty much like, I couldn't even believe what I was seeing, right? Like they had slides saying that programming our users was essentially a 4-step process, which they used their search engine as a means of that programming. And it was a 4-step process in which, content is generated and organized, and then it's like filtered and ranked. And then the last step, number 4, is people like us are programmed. And that cycle goes through again. And it was very clear from these documents that this is how Google was going to use their search engine in order to slowly inch everyone to the left. And, from my vantage point, it wasn't an inching. It was essentially they were running towards this new world order as fast as they could. And they were going to use this search engine manipulation in order to prevent a counter narrative. Anything that contradicted the globalist narrative, they were going to silence. And so, I came out and, when things got bad, I went to Project Veritas, which is my little hat right here, Project Veritas, which I still have and wear all the time. And we got them. We got all 950 pages out to the American public. Google swatted me before I was able to fully come out as myself, which is a whole other situation. And then what's interesting is that about a year ago, this Shadowland documentary was interested in running this film. And I kind of realized it might be a trap. And so what I did to protect myself is that I changed the contract. And they had this contract that, it's pretty much standard Hollywood contract, which is like, we get to, for a reality TV show, which is, we can do whatever we want. We can depict you, even if it's malicious and not representative, and you can't sue us. And I said, no. That's, this isn't just about me. This is about the leaks as well. And I don't want to, trash myself. And so I actually changed the contract, thinking that they wouldn't accept it. But to my surprise, they did. And I took out the part where they said that they could, intentionally defame me and misrepresent me. I said, no, you can't misrepresent me. You have to represent me as I am. Mm-hmm. And so they took it. And out of all the people that were in the series, Shadowland, I believe that I came out to be pretty good. Miriam Hene got skewered. Pretty much everyone else on the program got skewered, but I was able to say most of what I wanted to say to the audience. Obviously, they cut a lot out. I would argue that they violated the contract, but it's in no big enough way that I would do anything about it. And, I feel actually very fortunate that I was able to reach a really hard demographic that is hard to reach, which is the left. And that's definitely who I reached. And they are not happy about it, Jason. Like, if you look at the IMDb ratings, there's a lot of 1-star ratings on this film. The comments are that this seems like covert propaganda to indoctrinate us into right-wing ideology, which I think is really funny. And I'm actually really proud of the fact that people would think that, because it's just basically the truth, right? We're exposing them to the truth, and they think that it's right-wing, propaganda. Then, what? Like, the people that were directing this thing were leftists, except for the film crew. They seemed to be a little bit more neutral, which was really great, which is actually why they gained my trust. Mm-hmm. And so, we've got this film out, and Joe Berlinger, he told me, I met the director. He was like, we're trying to humanize the opposition, because so much of our society is, this grotesque caricature of the other side. And so him adding that 3-dimensional character, even if they believe it's sort of like the enemy, was something that the left didn't like. Like, they went and showed this film premiere at the Atlantic Film Festival, for lack of a better term. And the audience reaction to it was not good. And I have to think that, in a large way, I possibly disarmed this docuseries because I literally just changed the contract, and they couldn't, defame me out of that without fear of getting a lawsuit. And so, yeah.
Well, let's talk about Google for a minute and bring it back, because again, I thought, for me, you were one of the people where they didn't directly try to associate QAnon. That was kind of just inferred, right? Whereas I would say they tried to do the same thing via Greg Locke. And with Greg Locke, they tried to exploit his relationship with Roger Stone. But Google in particular, you talked about how you were working at YouTube. What a lot of people still don't understand about this company is it is a vast company with Alphabet at the head, with all these almost Russian doll cutouts of other organizations, whether it be YouTube, Google, even Calico, their immortality division. But they all work in unison. So while you're seeing this stuff coming in from Google, those algorithms eventually bleed their way down into YouTube. And we've seen over the last several years, even pre-COVID 1984, censorship via Erica Caramello Bar. I won't say his real name, but the supposed whistleblower in the first impeachment with Trump. My videos on that would get restricted. Then you couldn't talk about really anything COVID 1984. People lost their channels. People were demonetized. Myself, I've had videos taken down for supposed cyberbullying that were covering the Epstein case. This is a leviathan of a company. It is a monopoly like we have never seen before. I call it a technopoly. And it's a defense contractor on top of it all. A lot of people, again, and it'll get spun in these right-wing circles when Matt Gaetz starts, parading around Congress and talking about how programmers don't want to write for these drones. Well, I don't want to write for these drones either. Those drones, although they're being used overseas now, there's no reason that they won't come here at some point. Also, Google is a military contractor with NASA in the art of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. And I know that especially in your field and in this very real information war that we're in, quantum computing and artificial intelligence are at the apex of the command and control technology that they're utilizing to promote their narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, these AI bots are infiltrating everywhere right now. Like if you look at Reddit, it's essentially completely converged into SJW ideology. But commenting on Reddit, it's not that hard, right? You can have, a computer type out what it is that the response should be and someone could post it. YouTube's an interesting beast because it's authentic, right? Like there is this, an influencer, they go out, they talk about the narrative, they talk about, news and events, and it's hard to fake that. And so what they're trying to do right now is they're trying to, essentially boost up authoritarian voices. They call it authoritative, but it's authoritarian voices. And they are trying to push down, basically the nativist content, right? Like whatever it is that's not part of the globalist narrative, they're trying to, push it down, suppress it. And the thing is, it's, so great about all these alternative services is that, at least now we've got an escape hatch. We don't have to be on YouTube. Like Russell Brand is moving over to Rumble, .com, and as a result, if YouTube doesn't want to play the ball, people can move on to these other competitors. And so, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna make the point that it is great that people like Russell Brand are coming over, and he had a channel over on Rumble kind of simultaneously. It wasn't until recently when they either demonetized or removed one of his videos for supposed, I believe it was medical misinformation, that he started the live stream there. Andrew Tate, who has become notorious over the past several months, did the same thing and jumped over to Rumble. I would argue that's great, and I love what you're doing with Blast.video. That's another thing we're going to talk about in a moment. But unfortunately, you have, again, Google and really Alphabet as this technopoly, where YouTube itself is the #1 video platform in the world and the #2 search engine in the world, only behind its parent company, Google. And when you talk about uplifting authoritarian, because that's what it is, authoritarian sources, I just want to show my audience how vague they are with their rule sets and how it is not applied equally. So my channel was demonetized about 3 years ago. Okay, it's up. I could reapply right now. Here's the button behind me. There it is. But for people to see why I am demonetized, okay, I want to read just the one sentence they give me. We'll zoom in. Harmful content. Content that focuses on controversial issues and that is harmful to viewers. So that is basically anything that they want to say is quote unquote harmful. I don't cover anything that's not covered in a mainstream outlet or an available document or something that's in the public arena. In other words, I don't come out here and speculate and talk about super secret squirrel sources or any of that. So what they're really telling you is This person doesn't toe the line on narratives about the Ukraine, on narratives about death showers in the Middle East, on narratives on hate and lie shots. He doesn't follow those narratives, so he can't make money here. Now,
You
again,
might even think that Biden blew up the pipeline.
again, Biden doesn't do anything. He can barely not shit himself on the daily basis. I mean, he can barely speak. It's just like, here's the thing with Biden, right? He's a big mouthpiece for this agenda when he's reading off a prompter horribly. And for instance, Zach, the big media spiel last week was when he was at the Global Health Fund and he gets done with his speech and he goes to the side of the stage. He obviously doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do. But what people really should have focused on is that at that Global Health Fund meeting, first of all, he's introduced by Bill Gates. Let's start there. All right. And then when he's done talking, he's sitting there up there with pictures with great people like Gates and Macron and Justin Trudeau and so many of these global players. But what the media and even the alternative media has missed on this is during that speech, he talked about a 31-to-1 return. Let me repeat that. A 31-to-1 return for all of the investors that he was talking to and representatives of nation states for their global sustainable green agenda. So I know that a lot of people out there are aware with the infamous Bill Gates 20-to-1 return, where he's again outside of Davos, another one of these globalist meetings, and he starts talking about how those type of things are his greatest investment ever, and 20-to-1 is just about better than anything else. Biden told everybody, in no uncertain terms, 31-to-1 returns to reduce our standard of living and push this command control carbon agenda. Nowhere in the media. Nowhere in the media. So, that's another thing. A guy like me puts out a video like that, and maybe someone else sees it, it has a chance to go viral if it's not Jason Bermas. I have no chance to go viral. I'm going to top out at like 20,000 views max. Speak to how the algorithms work there.
Right. So, the algorithm itself, the overarching algorithm is called machine learning fairness. And machine learning fairness is a technique for training these things called classifiers. And these classifiers are trained usually for one specific topic, or like, for example, hate speech is an example of one, racism is another, sexism. And so they train these different classifiers on just these piles of data where everything is correctly labeled. And then what they do is that they take the videos that you do, they transcribe them immediately, like as they're uploading. And from that, they're able to see the content, the transcript of what it is that you're talking about. Then these classifiers run on this content. And from this content, it can make determinations like, oh, this is, something about COVID. This is something about, sexism or gender, or, war, I guess would probably be the latest update to this machine learning fairness. And so whenever it is that you use these trigger words, it fires. And when it fires, there's basically a matrix of different sort of scores. And if one of these goes red, then your video gets demonetized. And for repeat offenders, like, essentially yourself, that spreads too much truth, they're just going to remove all monetization whatsoever. They're going to apply shadow banning, but they're not going to go so far as to make you completely get off the platform and go to Rumble, right? Because they want to make sure that you've got that hope that you could somehow regain, your previous sort of highs with the company, and get back into their good favor. But, essentially they're just jerking you around. It's going to be eventually like, you got to get off and eventually go to Rumble, simulcast in YouTube, perhaps. But, as any of these New World Order plot plays come into effect, like, for example, the election, or what we saw with the COVID thing, these are all plots that are being laid out on the table. Essentially, when that happens, anyone that is saying something different than the narrative is going to become collateral damage. So it's just your channel, right? And so pretty much we're at a really destabilizing point in history. right? Like they're losing so much control of the narrative that they're just essentially bringing in Chinese communism into America. And it's basically the free market fighting as hard as it can with what it still has in order to, survive.
But let's stop it
And
there, because it's not a free market, okay? And
right.
that's why what you're doing with Blast.video is so damn important. But again, already shadow banned, already warnings going on around it. Let's talk about that. Now, YouTube actually took my channel altogether 4 different times. Now, twice I had to fight them on Twitter, and it was through the court of public opinion and drawing attention to them that I got my channels back. And I got it ruled, oh, you were right, and we're just going to take that away. And then 2 times, magically, I didn't get a response. I initiated the process, and then all of a sudden my channel came back. So, once again, most of it is AI. Sometimes it gets into the hands of a human being, but that doesn't really matter. You really have to put pressure on these people on the outside. Now, as far as, well, you build your own thing. You build your own thing. You see across the board massive collusion with the major social media platforms to block URLs such as BitChute, such as ban.video, such as yours, blast.video, with these warnings that somehow if you click on them, the demons from hell itself are going to uprise from Satan and take over your computer through these networks. And it's not a fair playing field. It's never been a fair playing field. I would argue that Rumble is making its way up there because of its not only, past partnership with YouTube, but with players that I think are sketchy, like Peter Thiel being heavy investors. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually interviewed for one of Peter Thiel's companies called Palantir.
Oh, wow. You interviewed for Palantir. Damn.
Yeah, I got to see the inside of the company. It's scary shit. Essentially, it was a shadow social networking system built in Java, and they're basically like we're ingesting data from telephone companies that I guess they had an agreement to get this information, and then they're building out these social media networks of who is talking to who, and they didn't really care what was actually being said. They just wanted to know who was talking to who, and then they could map out the human relationship network, or basically on a planetary scale. And I was just starting my job at Google at the time, so I didn't do if I had done Palantir, I would have been fabulously wealthy because they were just in one little office space in by Stanford at the time.
And by the way, Palantir has gone huge. It's been utilized by governments across the world, and really it was the next step in what Amdocs and Comverse were doing previously with all the phone records and information and metadata they were able to achieve through that. And I would even say that that was an extension of what Norris Insight Systems were doing pre 9/11 that you can only really find out about if you look into Hepting versus AT&T. And this is where they had servers in all the major telecom networks that were funneling all direct information, all communications directly to the National Security Agency.
You know your facts, man. Yes, absolutely. So I don't know, like Peter Thiel, I'm ambivalent towards him. He's done some things that aren't that good. Like, remember when he sued Gawker?
Yeah, he took Gawker out on behalf of Hulk Hogan's sex tape with Bubba the Love Sponge's wife. And a lot of people don't understand that, look, Gawker isn't the best, right? But either you have free speech or you don't. And
they published Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs.
That's exactly, well, it wasn't the flight logs. So I've actually had Nick Bryant on the program, and Nick Bryant was the guy that was able to get the quote-unquote black book, the one black book we know about of associations. And Nick Bryant is also the author of this book right here, The Franklin Scandal. I had interviewed him well over a decade ago when he put this book out. He went to literally every major media outlet he had written for over the years, including the Rolling Stone and others, and nobody would touch it. Gawker published it. Gawker was the only one to publish it. And within years of that lawsuit started on behalf of Peter Thiel, who had sour grapes that he had been outed as a homosexual. Basically, he was closeted.
Was that even that big of a secret within Silicon Valley? I don't think so.
Of course it wasn't. And this just kind of shows the hypocrisy of all of these social climbers and social predators at the top, that they will do what they have to do to gain that status, and that they will be dishonest if they have to be dishonest. And basically, he took a revenge swipe at Gawker, and he bankrupted them through the Hogan sex tape case.
Yep.
So very sketchy individual, man.
Very sketchy individual. And the thing is that, you know, the question is Rumble controlled opposition? They might be. I don't know. I'm hoping that they're not. I'm hoping that, you know, they're just trying to do the free speech thing. And if they are, then, you know, I support them and I like them. And I actually feed from their, you know, system into blast.video. Like, I don't steal any of their content. I just generate links back to the Rumble site. And I'm glad that there is at least some semblance of a free market out there for free speech today. We don't know if that's going to last, though.
Yeah, well, I'm on Rumble. I was very hesitant. I've been now there, I believe, 4 or 5 months. And already, even with a fraction of the audience I'm supposed to have at YouTube, I think we're about 69,000 strong over on YouTube. We're about 13,000 strong over on Rumble. Now some of my videos are actually getting more views in the thousands via Rumble, but at the same time, you can't monetize them in the same manner as YouTube. So that puts you at an economic disadvantage, number one. And number two, again, this is still you can't understate what it's like to be the number one video platform on the World Wide Web. And you can't understate what it's like to be the number 2 search engine in the world behind your parent company. Those types of things give those platforms really the powers of publishers in order to try to institute and imprint what they see fit as a reality on their viewers, which is massive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get into Shadowlands a little bit more, okay? Here was my take on this thing, all right?
Did you watch the whole thing through?
Oh, yeah, of course I did. Watched all 6. Watched it all the way through. Dude, I not only watched that, but I also intertwined it with the Vice series In Search of Q, which was in their second season. And there's a lot of overlap there because the running theme, no matter what, is these people, there's never anybody put in a positive light. Let me say that right out of the gates. Nobody is put in a positive light in this. And most of these people, they try to portray as either grifters or people whose lives are in shambles. For instance, the woman who is a restaurant owner, pizza parlor owner. Now, I'm sure they had a ton of shots of her with her customers, with her friends, where everything was normal and everything was going well. But of course, they focused on, she went to the Capitol. She's part of a dangerous insurrection. She went there with her friend. Her friend played ball and did everything that the prosecutors told her to do, and he's just going to get probation. She followed and I definitely don't recommend this to people, but she followed the sovereign citizen movement, and because of that, she's in jail, right?
Yeah.
So she's falling apart. They try to get as many tears as possible. Then they go after the guy who's teaching the sovereign citizen thing, right? They go after the V-Police guy who's into the MMS thing. And of course, you know, they don't just want him to be a guy that's giving out MMS. Of course, he has previous legal troubles, so they can go back to that. In your case, you know, they focus on the relationship with you and Miriam, and then really try to focus on the relationship with you and your dad, even use it in the trailer as kind of this emotional trigger that if you start questioning things, you might lose your relationship with your father. Now, I don't know how your relationship is with your dad right now, or even friends. But for me, at least, because I've been in this game so long, I had those type of experiences all the way back in 2003, 2004. Mm-hmm. Now, I never had family abandon me.
Oh, you were an early adopter. You were way early on this whole trend then.
Well, I mean, I'm one of the guys that made Loose Change. So we put that out in 2005, right? So, you know, before that, when it was just bar conversations, I didn't have a magic box in front of me where I could pull up literally any video in the world I wanted or anything that I had archived. In order to really, outside of the box, talk to somebody, I'd either have to break out a laptop or have them come over into my room and then access the information and then show them on a CRT monitor that's inches big, and start them there. And that was definitely a lot tougher, right? So there were those moments where, Bermas, I don't want to hear about this anymore. I love you, man, but we're not going to talk about politics. There was still heavy sentiment that Arabs and Muslims were the enemy. You know, we're talking about war on terror time, Iraq war time, before even, you know, people were really questioning the legitimacy of WMDs. I mean, there was a fervor. Now, you fast forward to me putting out a film that now all of a sudden everybody had access to through Google, ironically, through Google Video coming in and trying to overtake YouTube as the #1 video platform. Because for those that forget, YouTube only let you put up 10-minute videos initially unless you had a director's account, which was coveted and hard to have. So all of a sudden, the film just shoots up. It's in the top 10 several times. People are putting it in different languages. Now I'm starting to get phone calls. Hey, man, look, I was rough on you last year, bro. I'm really sorry. Hopefully you can go catch a beer. I'd get hugs for people I hadn't seen in years at alumni weekends. I'd get handshakes. I had family members that obviously were not in agreement with me, very interested all of a sudden in my viewpoint. It took that film overtaking the zeitgeist and getting into popular culture for it to reverse this idea that I was some kind of kook, right? Or lone nut, and that I didn't have any evidence at all. So on one end, that happens, and then I continue on my work. I'm the first guy Alex Jones gives a show to on InfoWars all the way back in 2009. I put out several other documentary films. They don't quite get the buzz that the other ones did, but people at least respected my work, right? So there were people that would come after me, but they'd have at least respect for it. And it wasn't like I was losing personal relationships. And on top of that, a lot of my personal relationships have nothing to do with politics whatsoever. They have a lot to do with drinking beer and having some wings and watching some UFC, which is okay. When this is new, and you can't quite get it across to a family member, it can be difficult. But that was the focus again and again and again in this picture, that if you go outside of mainstream narratives, you're going to destroy your home life. Now, aside for what they did to you, I thought it was really interesting that one of the people that they were discussing this with was a mother who had 3 children, and she had divorced her husband, apparently because of QAnon. I can't verify that. All they show is one email. And this guy doesn't want to be filmed. The kids aren't filmed. They're heavily, I mean, they catch this woman crying all the time. Again, the emotions are running high every time they're interviewing her. And it gets to a custody case, right? And he gets his kids. I want to repeat that. He gets his kids. They play the audio of the judge there. And still there's this portrayal that somehow this guy is a bad guy and this woman's kids are in danger. And, you know, and they also try to make.
She was a bitch. I'm sorry. I can't take it. This is so bad. What she was doing. She was trying to take this guy's kids away from him because she didn't like, you know, his politics. And it's just like, look, like that's going nuclear on someone to take away their kids. And they're in the film. They're kind of like presenting it as something that's like rational. And, you know,
no, they're presenting it as like a travesty of justice that they're going to see as their father. It's crazy to me. They're trying to set a precedent that your kids should be taken away from you, again, if you start asking the wrong questions. And on top of that, you had the other gentleman who had a toddler at the time, and he went into the Capitol. And at one point in the film, he's only able to see his toddler daughter, who I think is like 3 years old, for 90 minutes a month. Eventually that increases to something like 3 hours a week, which is still insanity. But at one point, again, they want him to bend the knee and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for going to January 6th. They say, you know, knowing everything you know now, would you have stopped yourself from going to the Capitol? He's like, no. And again, that's the highest sin, that you're not bending the knee to these people and admitting you did something wrong for questioning the election. That's pure insanity, Zach.
Yeah. You know, and the thing is that they don't want this to be normalized because, look, they're planning on rigging elections across the world. You know, what's going on with Brazil right now is Lula isn't even campaigning. He's kind of hiding in his basement, sort of like Hillary Clinton did. And what's interesting is There's some rumors flying around Telegram right now that they were actually going to try to win. The Globals were going to try to win in the first round, and that was somehow aborted. And what's interesting is there are reports that there are certain towns where there are more votes than there were people. Hello, right? Where did we see that last?
Apparently
Right
in
here in
Imagination Land. That's where we saw that, because it doesn't exist. Ooh! And
Yeah.
that's the whole thing, is there's kind of like this outward denial, and especially with what they did to you. And what do? They briefly show Veritas and InfoWars covering your story. They show you saying that the mainstream media said it was a nothing burger. They run with the nothing burger. They don't show any of the documents themselves. And then they point out how many people had access to it. Well, really, that should scare the shit out of people, that there were thousands of people at that company that had access to that, and you're the only one that stepped up. That should be the takeaway. But instead, they again flip reality on its head, and they act like, because you're the only one that said something, who cares if they're censoring everybody? Let's not show the documentation. It's
funny too, because like every single time I would make a point, they would cut, right? They would cut over, and then they would like recontextualize it so that they could like sort of like narrate what it was that I was saying in the context of that. It was more like my opinion than like these cold hard facts that I was revealing to the public. And the fact that they had to, interject pretty much after every single point that I made just goes to show, like, it's just so in your face propaganda, viewpoint discrimination, that, you have to be completely zonked out of your mind on propaganda for you not to notice that you're being propagandized by this film, because that's how obvious it was. Like, if it wasn't propaganda, then what they would do is that they would let, they would just let me say what it is that I'm trying to say without having to cut every 30 seconds into a contextualization of what it was that I just said within the realm of their ideology.
And their overall ideology is that these type of viewpoints are tearing the country apart and heading us into, again, their narrative-driven civil war. Guys, go take a step outside. Go knock on your neighbor's door. Go across the street. Have a conversation. I don't care how they voted and how you voted. You're going to find out you have way, way more in common with them than the people at the top that are trying to sell you on this idea that we're all at each other's throats and we're all going to kill each other. Now, I would again argue that if any violence starts happening in this country in the context of left versus right, conservative versus liberal, you are going to have a mess of a situation where those at the top of the predator class and even their minions within politics, the media, and Hollywood are going to be protected. Even if you were to take out some of those targets that you would think are important, and obviously I'm not going to advertise who those people might be, but power is a vacuum, okay? And there are many people out there that would just love to be the Speaker of the House, for instance, would just love to be the head of the Atlantic, if you will. There's always going to be a place for those people to come up. I mean, you can look throughout nation, state, and world politics. When there's a coup that goes on, or there's even a president or a leader that's assassinated, like that, somebody's ready to fill that spot. So it would only be advantageous for the system that is taking place right now, which is the gradual eradication of our standard of living, of our basic freedoms and rights, of our Constitution and Bill of Rights, if at the same time you had an armed conflict between what they refer to as the peasant class, me and you. That's what they want. They're trying to drive that narrative home so that, let's say it doesn't happen, they could just purport a false flag, a mass shooting, a bombing at a supposed peaceful protest, right or left, and try to not only ignite this quote-unquote civil war that they want so much, but then institute even more martial law and dictatorial-like powers, Zach.
Yeah, and I believe that this is, what's happening. You see that the cops are getting more armored. They're showing less of their face. And it seems that they don't want to just put us more into an authoritarian, situation with our country. They also want to, make it look like the movies, right? Like cops, where you can't see their humanity, you can't see who they are. Vague figures of authority that have, these incredible machines that can project pain across the battlefield, whether that be an urban setting, a street, where there's a bunch of people protesting, or, gas grenades or what have you. It's clear that they want us to understand that we're going into this, more authoritarian situation, and that they want us to feel powerless. And that's the thing that is dehumanizing about this whole thing, is that they want to lock you down. They want to take away your right to vote. They want to take away your right to speak out on the internet. And, and the reason why they're doing this is because, the truth is so powerful. And they've been covering up the truth for a very long time. And now, because of this invention called social media, which is essentially a collective consciousness, a hive mind, that, the first thing that it woke up and said to us is, hey, all your elites are lying to you. Right. And the thing is that I believe that they're worried that if they shut it all down, that, that it's too late. We've already sort of woken up. Maybe their chance to sort of shut down the internet, sort of passed them by, around 2008. But at this point, there's too much of a mass awakening right now for them to put the lid back on it. And with the people waking up and seeing what's happening with the elections across the world, right? Like now it's Brazil's time to wake up and realize that, yes, there are more votes coming out of, these counties than there are people. And what's interesting is that before that, here's the change with the left. You would go and you would tell someone this inside of a bar, and you'd be like, oh, you're crazy, da, 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 da. And they just think that you're like latched onto something. But now everyone knows what the story is, right? Like pretty much everyone's heard that there are more votes and that there's people. And so it's gone from, what are you talking about? You're crazy, to, no, that's a lie. That's impossible. like almost like a Luke Skywalker freaking out, about the revelation of his father, is what a leftist does, when you confront them with vote rigging, right? And so, I feel at least that's progress. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that, eventually we'll establish some sort of equilibrium. Maybe it might undergo some sort of physical kinetic conflict. I don't know, right? I hope that it doesn't. But it seems that they're driving us towards this conflict point. And Yuri Bezmenov, he comes in, he says that, well, they're trying to destabilize and bring us to a point of crisis in order to bring about their revolution. But when you study these other revolutions, it seems that the United States is not quite going to plan. And before in history, we've never really had social media in there, right? It was all newspapers. And so it was definitely more of the big versus the little guy. Where right now I see that it's essentially like there's a new system. We're all participating in it, whether as users, whether giving clicks, watching, sharing, producing content like yourself, or disclosing truth like the whistleblowers. Like, we are changing society right now. We're witnessing history being done right here in America and across the world.
Well, I would say, as far as the election issue, especially in this country, and I am watching Brazil rather closely, because one of the things that they had in an advantage in this election that I don't think we had in our country in 2020 is that they had honest polling on the outside. And that was impossible during COVID 1984, because how are you going to have honest polling when you have massive mail-in ballots, when you have restrictions on who's allowed to be there and who's allowed to count those votes? However, the infrastructure that's been built over the last 20 plus years is still in place for these midterms. And anybody who thinks that a red wave is coming, or even if it did, that these people are going to save you, I would say that you have to be extremely cautious. And one of the things that you saw even phony Bill Barr talking about in the run-up to the 2020 election was the Carter Baker report, where they were talking about essentially if you had mail-in ballots, that is going to be the easiest way to rig an election. You don't want those. A lot of people spun that, ignored it, said, oh, well, we've instituted it in this place and that place in the United States over the last decade. It works great. It's the best thing since breakfast. Everything's gravy, baby. But what nobody discussed is the fact that Carter himself said, we're not auditing any of these machines. He goes, we should at least be doing a 1 to 3% random audit of these machines to ensure that whatever they're counting is the hard copy of what they say they're counting. We still don't do that. And these machines, even pre-Dominion, we're talking Diebold, were using a system called fractional reserve voting. And as you know, Zach, any system that is plugged into a wall or has access in any way to an internet or Ethernet port, etc., or even a USB port can be hacked rather easily. We've actually seen it done in many forums, even outside of like the most famous ones, DEF CON. So speak to that in this upcoming election. We're a little over 30 days out. The infrastructure is still there. Nancy Pelosi was on Colbert, I believe, last night saying, hey, we're taking the House, baby. Don't you worry. We're doing it. We got it. It's a lock. What are your thoughts on our ability to have free and fair elections if we can't change that infrastructure in time?
I mean, I think that it precludes it. I don't think we're going to be able to have a free and fair election. Essentially, this is a takeover. They're going to do it in one direction. It's going to get worse. And it's going to take an enormous amount of fighting in order to reverse that. Yes, we can possibly slow it down in Florida, and some of these other red states. But, it's pretty much like a one-way street with these people. There's a tsunami of pressure to put in these vote rigging things. And it's not just one way that they're rigging the vote, right? Like, it's mail-in ballots, it's absentee, it's ballot mules, it's this electronic system that they've got. And the reason why they're doing all this redundancy is because, look, if one of their methods gets found out, they can just switch to one of the other methods, right? And when people and the auditors try to figure out what's going on, they're going to play this shell game, right? Like, look what happened with Cyber Ninjas in Arizona. There were bad actors that got in there and said, oh, it's all in the kinematic artifact detection. Like, we need to look at the ballots themselves. They convinced, the Arizona legislature to come in and spend all of their resources and all of their money into buying these very expensive machines that were going to look for fake ballots. And it turns out that the entire thing was a dead end. The election rigging was coming from fake people basically fake people at fake addresses sending in fake ballots.
Well, let me just say this. One of the ways that they kind of precluded any dissent is the language and the Bernaysian terminology they used. So in other words, very quickly, it wasn't that there was no voter tampering or voter fraud. The line was there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
Yeah.
So again, you'd have to take that definition. What is widespread voter fraud? Is it one state? Is it two states? Is it a county? Is it two counties? It's obviously subjective. And you see these people at the very top build that into the infrastructure of the system, just like you said. So if one part is found out, or one part is delegitimized, or one part is questioned, they have a way to fall back on that semantically and legally.
Yeah, it's like almost like, oh, look, well, first off, they'll move the goalposts, right? And then if they get found out about the fraud, they've got the 5 other ways that they're committing fraud. They'll just strengthen those and continue to go on. So I've got this very pessimistic view, unfortunately, of our election systems here in America. I think that we are definitely, facing the end of the empire. And the question is, what do we do from here? A bug out, plan might be really good. Maybe it's time to look at living in another country if this United States falls, because, it's under active subversion by the communist parties around the world, whether that's Venezuela, especially the CCP. Like the CCP owns California, right? Like they've been buying our ports here. That was what the Clinton scandal, Whitewater, was all about. China's got their meat hooks in America. They want America to fall, and the globalists have signaled that they want China to be the next country to hold the world reserve currency. And so,
well, let me say this. Klaus Schwab, head of the World Economic Forum, said that China should be ready to be in the leader role in the near future. This is not something that they're being shy about. And look, I'm not somebody who tries to, is a China-phobe. There's 1.2 billion people there. But the bottom line is that collectivist model is the model of the quote-unquote New World Order. In my film, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, I really wanted to know, where did this terminology come from? How far back in history can I trace it? And the first real work of length that I could trace it to is over 100 years old. It is called The New World Order by a guy named Samuel Zane Batten. And it takes a very Christian perspective, okay, especially for the mores at the time. But what is it overall preaching? It's preaching the end of individualism, and that everybody must work together towards goals for the state. And it's this authoritarian globalist ideology of the collective instead of the individual. And at the end of the day, whether you want to call it socialism, communism, totalitarianism, what you have is authoritarians sitting at the top, and then a collectivist society built underneath, in which command and control is your only avenue. That's it. You don't have anything else. You're being tracked, traced, and databased all the time. And the next part of this fourth industrial revolution is beyond track, trace, and database on the outside, and to bring it to our very bodies with the Internet of Bodies instead of things, Zach.
Yeah, that's correct. And AI is going to do a lot to destroy pretty much everything that we hold dear right now. Like this artificial intelligence this last year was, wow, what a year. 2022 was the turning point for artificial intelligence, right? We went from not being able to even generate pictures to not only generating pictures, but now we're generating 3-second GIF images, the animated ones. Where you can basically tell it to make like a movie of something in an orange hat, and then it's working on the computer, and then boom, it spits it out. And this is just the beginning of this, right? Like this is essentially like a vacuum tube of a transistor, and by the end of this, we're going to have 4 gigahertz, 32 core systems.
So wait a minute, let me stop you. Let me stop you, because a lot of people don't understand what you're referring to. You're referring to Moore's law. And basically, for those that don't know what Moore's law is, it's the size of a transistor and how it shrinks every 2 years. And then eventually it shrinks every 1 year. And it went from transistors into the chips that are now the cores on your devices.
Right. Like, think how, when you were a kid, you had like 386s or 46, microprocessors. And now they're just these amazing, magic boxes of infinite power, essentially, right? Like, think about something like that order of increase in ability from like the 1990s to 2000, like the 2022s today. That's the scale that artificial intelligence is going to get better by. Like what we see today is just so simple and so crude. When these artificial intelligence systems get more mature, get larger, what we're going to see is the total sum appropriation of all of humanity's knowledge into these systems. They're going to become oracles of knowledge, and they're going to have godlike intelligences. And the thing is, you can spawn multiple copies of these. You can put it into a robot with a 5G connection back to the computer. And now all of a sudden, you've got a humanoid robot walking around with the total sum knowledge of everything that humanity has ever created, every book, every word.
I would just argue this, that they're going to curate what they can and cannot have, because they've seen AI get out of control before with the wrong inputs, much like they curate information now. But ultimately, what you're discussing is something we actually covered this week via Ray Kurzweil back in '99 when he was advertising for his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. And he makes the argument that these entities that we eventually create will not in fact be conscious, but will be so intelligent and cunning and convincing that they will convince us that they are conscious, and that will lead to them eventually having the same laws applied to them as sentient beings, as human beings, and that will be the beginning of the end of biology and carbon-based life on this planet. Those are his words, not mine.
Right.
You would think as carbon-based beings that are actually spiritual and believe that we have a consciousness, etc., we would be doing everything we can to fight this tooth and nail, but incrementally, we see this plan going into place with things like Biden's recent executive order on sustainability and biotechnology.
Right. And also you saw Saudi Arabia give citizenship to an artificial intelligence. I think that happened like, what, 2 years ago?
So that is Sophia, and it's really funny that you bring up Sophia, because Sophia's got a cousin, Zach. And Sophia's,
really?
Oh, Sophia's got a cousin, Zach. And Sophia's cousin is Grace, the AI robot, which they actually instituted in westernized countries. They'd already used some of these nursing home robots over the past decade in Japan. But they utilized this one during COVID-19 84 in Australia. And ultimately, what they would like Grace to do is to run on the blockchain, and Cardano in particular. When you talk about AI life forms, let me see if I can find this one in the mess I have over here. We have to talk about TerraSim. So TerraSim, oh, sorry, that's gender ideology there. TerraSim is the religion that is produced by the highest earning woman executive in the U.S. That's Martine Rothblatt. That's the really most powerful transgender individual on the planet. This is the person that wrote the laws on satellite systems. Came up with Sirius Satellite Radio, is the CEO of United Therapeutics, and maybe this is TerraSim right here. Yes, it is. And this is the religion, TerraSim Movement Foundation, where if you just saw the individual that person was with, let's bring them back up. That is Rothblatt's wife. Well, Rothblatt's already made that into Robot Bina 48 as part of the TerraSim movement. And also wrote the book, Zach, just so everybody knows, From Transgender to Transhuman, a manifesto of the freedom of form. Two of Martine Rothblatt's other books, this one's from the 90s, Unzipped Genes, where they talk about taking hold of life before birth. In other words, you're not going to be able to have a biological son or daughter. They're going to create that for you. And Virtually Human, The Promise and Peril of Digital Immortality, where this person is actively involved in mind cloning and talking about bringing these entities into reality and talking about the fact that they will have legal rights in the future. And basically, there are two sides to this transhumanism thing, which Rothblatt's working on both. There is the immortality biological idea of Ray Kurzweil at Calico. And then there is the peasant class merging with machines and believing that they could somehow upload their consciousness to a digital machine. And as long as they're able to trick the vast majority of the plebs into that, they believe that they will be able to at least double their lifespan within the next 20 to 30 years, and then go from there to possibly have the real fountain of youth, aka immortality, Zach.
Yeah. And the problem is that if you don't merge with the machine, you're not going to have the awesome, intelligence. And if you don't have that, then you're going to be even more obsolete. And so you're caught in this catch-22. You pretty much have to do it. And if you don't, you're screwed. And if you do, you might be screwed as well, because they control the hardware. And so, look, I got a taste of this artificial intelligence. I installed Microsoft's Copilot, which is an AI-assisted programming tool. Wow, I can't go back. It's pretty fundamental. It's pretty amazing. 1.0 was incredible. 2.0 is going to be just even more insane. And now that I've had this taste of it, I have to say, how can you not merge with the AI when it comes out? And I think that's going to be one of the big things that are going to really, kind of like rip our society apart, is a lot of the nativists won't want to merge that AI. They'll think that it's evil. They'll think that it's possessed. And there's going to be a whole subsection of the population, probably the leftists, that are going to do that merging. And so the question is, what happens when you've got, a large section of the population not wanting to merge and everyone else merging? And then what happens when you've got the elites that are ultra merged? Essentially, there'll be AI with sort of like a fleshy center. And I think, it's I can't even make a prediction because it's so radically different than what we have right now. We can't even use any of the history lessons we've experienced in order to, predict what's going to happen with human civilization when this vastly superior artificial intelligence essentially takes over.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have to save that for another broadcast where we can talk about human 2.0, maybe even 3.0, bioengineering, and where this is headed and what exactly we're up against. But we're up on an hour, and, I just want to say that I thank you for coming on here. I hope that if people have seen Shadowland, that they really look into all the information that you put out there, and you can find that at zachvorhies.com. And if you're looking for a feed of alternative media that is not curated based on authoritative sources, blast.video is certainly the spot. What would you like to leave my audience with, Zach?
Look, guys, if you're looking for the best place for news on the internet 24/7, go to blast.video. It's better than any of the other services because it scans Rumble, BitChute, Brighteon, Gab TV for, the latest videos for the content producers that you love. It's going to combine them all together like the Drudge Report and put them out on Blast. So go to blast.video, not .com, not .net. It's blast.video. And be informed of everything that's happening today.
All right, Zach, a pleasure as always. And like I said, maybe within the next month or so, we'll get together. We'll talk about this AI revolution and this transhumanist movement at length. It's always a pleasure to have you on, brother.
Likewise. Thank you, Jason.
All right. Thank you. That's Zach Vorhies, everybody. Another great interview. I do want to thank Jacob Griesmer, for the tips over at Rockfin. The Democrats have been infiltrated by the neoconservatives. They are not liberal or left. Both parties controlled by big guns, big oil, big pharma, and the big banks. They are their constituency. Aristocrats all have abortions and do drugs. They don't care about these laws that don't apply to them. Stop going along. Folks, thumbs it up, subscribe, share. Remember, I am a documentary filmmaker. All of my films are free. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order to Find, and Shade the Motion Picture. Remember, for only $1 right now, you can go sign up at redvoicemedia.net, redvoicemedia.net/Jason, and we're going to be doing 4 days a week, 2 hours a day. This is a sample pack of what you're seeing this morning. I can't wait to get down and dirty with it. It's going to be great. You want to directly support me, you can do so by the Buy Me a Coffee link down below. We rumbling. You can subscribe on Rockfin and get everybody else's stuff as well who does the premium content. And then if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to thumbs it up, subscribe, and share. Folks, it is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I want to thank you for joining me on this broadcast, this journey, and I will see you all on the flip side.